So if we can all think back to that moment in March of 2020, when we as leaders were faced with the possibility of shutting down, the fear, the doubt, the uncertainty. I was recently catching up with a fellow P&G classmate, Dave Kimball, who's now CEO of Ulta Beauty, and we were talking about that moment. For him, the idea as a retailer that you would be closing all of your stores. How would you sell your product? What would happen to your employees? I know many of you are in the same place. For me, as a leader of a creative industry, the question was, I was getting 1,000 calls from clients saying, I need to change what I'm doing. How would we respond? How would we continue service? Everybody was scrambling to find a solution, and we all needed new ideas. About the same time, I was also having a conversation with another P&G classmate, Bill Brace, who was at Signet. And they had just had their leadership meeting, and their CEO, Gina Drosos, had shared that 48 hours was now the new long-range planning. Clearly a paradigm shift. So not only did we need new ideas, we needed new ideas fast. When this was all taking place, McKinsey actually did a study on innovation. And surprisingly, only 21% of executives felt they had the expertise and commitment to fuel new growth through innovation. What is more, many were deprioritizing innovation to conserve cash, minimize risk, and wait for clarity. So if no decision is a decision, they were almost doubling down on the status quo. And what happened? Consumer behavior, how we search, how we buy, how we communicate, what we eat, what we wear, everything underwent radical and massive transformation. And those that were ready took advantage in their ability to rapidly meet changing consumer needs, create new markets, and attract new customers. It's estimated that 96% of businesses had to radically overhaul their go-to-market approach. Clearly much more than the 21% who actually felt ready to innovate. So as a leader of a business whose core product is creativity, I find this whole thing fascinating. Harvey Firestone once said, capital is not so important for business. Experience is not so important. You can get both of these things. What is important is ideas. With ideas, there's nothing you cannot accomplish. And almost every leader I speak with cites the need for growth, the need for ideas and innovation as a top priority. Yet here we sit with McKinsey in the moment of crisis saying only 21% of leaders were prepared. So what's the secret of driving innovation, unlocking creativity and ideas that Harvey Firestone references? I believe it comes down to three things: people, environment, and culture. As leaders, we all need to have the aspiration and the vision to change, but I think more importantly, are we choosing to create the environment where innovation and creativity can thrive, where it's rewarded, and where people feel the energy to actually create that change? And it actually reminds me of one of my favorite presentations I ever had here at Procter. There was a presentation called The Smell of the Place by Dr. Ghoshal. And he was a teacher at the London school, and basically he had grown up in Mumbai. And he talked about how in Mumbai you'd wake up in the morning and it was 110 degrees. And he said it was all you could do to walk across the room because you were tired and overwhelmed. Yet he was vacationing, he said, into the south of France each summer. And he said he would wake up in the morning and the air was so fresh. He would walk 6 miles before breakfast. And he said as a consultant, he would walk into companies and within 3 seconds, know the smell of the place. Could you get up and walk 6 miles before breakfast, or was it all you could do to walk across the room? And I've been thinking so much about this. We have 5,000 creative people in the US. And if I think about the smell of the place now, it smells like your kitchen, or your living room, or worse yet, for our young employees, their childhood bedroom. Because the smell of the place is whatever house you're sitting in. And it's ironic because if I look, we as Publicis have done really well for the past 2 years, as has P&G. You know, our share price just established us as the most valuable holding company. So do things smell really good? But what I worry about it as you dig deeper, I believe the very thing that has allowed us to thrive and be successful, which is technology, is actually the thing that's going to be our creative undoing. So what do I mean by that? You know, when COVID hit, we were at a time where we could have never imagined working remotely. You know, the fact that we were shutting down the office, never have we thought we'd be able to get the work done. Yet technology, the ability to connect, to Zoom, to present, had reached a point where not only was it possible, but it was a decent experience. With this new technology, we could meet with anyone, anytime, anywhere. It truly transformed how we work. And in some respects, you could argue we had never been more connected. And I have to say, like personally, there's many aspects I liked. Traveling less, sleeping in my own bed, getting to have breakfast with my wife. You know, but if I step back, what I fear is that while we're all spending more time, we're spending time locked in meetings, sitting in front of screens, and not really getting the chance to think. You know, so are we really connected? You know, Steve Jobs defines creativity by linking it to connection. He said creativity is just connecting things. When you ask creative people how they did something, they often feel guilty. Why? Because they really just saw something different. It seemed obvious to them after a while, but they were able to connect new experiences. They were able to synthesize new things in new ways. And for me, that connectivity is the unlock. So I believe if we're locked in Zoom all day and working remotely, we're forgetting the true power of connection, the power of coming together to debate ideas, to put work on the wall, and use it for inspiration. What's more, technology has enabled us to communicate, but I would also argue it's distracting us from true connection and shutting down our creativity. The second thing I think technology has really enabled is the ability to access content, to know anything about anyone and everything immediately. You know, recently I was with a group of creatives preparing for a client meeting, and someone asked for image of pouring gas on the fire. And someone went and Googled, and seconds later there's thousands of Jiffy images of people putting gas on the fire. Not all of them pretty. You know, and the ability to actually get that inspiration, it reminded me of a TED Talk that speaks to the idea of slow multitasking, doing many things at the same time to fuel new ideas and spark imagination. And I'm a firm believer of this. But key for this is while creativity needs input and creativity needs inspiration, you know, browsing, multitasking inspires new ideas and helps form these connections that Steve Jobs talks about. You know, and it fuels creativity. Leo Burnett famously said that curiosity about life in all of its aspects is still the secret of great creative people. The challenge we have with this endless source of information, the idea of slow multitasking, was actually to take a step back. And while the web is an endless source of information and entertainment for the curious, I think there's a dark side. And that dark side is we now have a culture of employees endlessly sitting on Zoom from 7 to 7 while searching the web, playing with their cell phones, doing their emails, and instead of actually connecting with people, instead of throwing around ideas and being inspired, they're fatigued, they're distracted, and I think we're seeing it through the Great Resignation, they're burning out. I think probably most of us have experienced it, most of us have seen it. So what to do? I believe it comes back to our core three things: people, environment, and culture. First, people. I believe we as leaders need to help our teams to deliberately plan time to think, clear our heads, and ideate. You know, you think about, in addition to this endless hours of Zoom, there was research that people are touching their cell phone 2,617 times a day. That trigger of distraction. You know, and the University of Texas research said that it takes 23 minutes to get refocused. So 2,617 times 23, you're probably not thinking much throughout the day. What's more, there's research by Dr. Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, he's a neuroscientist, found that people have an average of 70,000 thoughts a day, but 80% of them are the same thoughts you had the day before. Why? You're in this triggered state. If only I'd made that basketball shot in 8th grade, my whole life would be different. So I think about this all the time. We have 5,000 people whose job is to come up with new ideas, and if 80% of their thoughts are the same ones they had the day before, it doesn't leave a lot of space for new ideas. Imagine the potential we could unleash if we got that up to 60 or 70%. So how do we help people focus? I believe the answer is to invest in mental health training and programs that help our people clear their minds and be more present. There's an overwhelming amount of research that suggests that people who practice mindfulness, meditation, and being present have more cognitive flexibility and are better able to solve problems. And I'm sure Ariana is going to talk a lot about this later. But we need to educate our employees on the benefits of mindfulness by providing access to content like mindful.org, or deploying training programs like Life Cross Training that can help people learn new behaviors to be more present, more engaged, and more effective, and unlock the human potential of creativity. 2, environment. You know, I think for many people right now, the answer is let's get people back to the office as quickly as possible. Yet I believe this is the wrong solution. And I guess you would call it in the creative world, you would call it the wrong brief. You know, if you really brief the problem on understanding what people want, no clients are calling saying, let me see your office, when are you back in the office? What they're asking is, how do we have better ideas and creativity? And if I were to rebrief the team, I think the focus for all of us should be, how do we define the future of work? And how do we rethink about this inflection point as a way to inspire connection, feed curiosity, fuel creativity, and build culture? And I believe the answer is in understanding the difference in what I'm calling heads up and heads down work. You know, when I think about the most creative people in the world, to be honest, the office is probably not where they start to get their best ideas. Their work is iterative, it's inspired, and in many instances, as Steve Jobs says, it comes from making new connections inspired by culture. By definition, they need to be in and of the world to get this inspiration. Separately, when it's time to write, create, they need to basically be heads down. They need to focus and hone the thought. You know, conversely, when they have the idea, there's huge benefit to being able to share it, to put it up on the wall, to interrogate it and debate it. And this is what I think of as heads up work. So I believe we as leaders need to think about the future of work in an environment where we allow people the flexibility to be heads down, to be their most creative, to basically work on the beach if that's where they are basically best, but then separately create an environment where people can be heads up, create culture, create community, inspire creativity, and collaborate. Which brings to the last, and probably one of the most important, is culture. You know, I believe that we actually need to think strongly about creating a culture of kindness to inspire creativity. Why? Because creativity requires leaps of faith, leaps of the imagination. And making a leap takes trust that can only be built by being together and forming relationships. In my experience with creativity, it's not a lightning strike, it's an evolution. It requires time, it requires collaboration and input. So we as leaders must trust our people to be alone and do great work when they're heads down and not be in the office. And we as leaders must invest the effort to bring people together, to build relationship, and be heads up to share their work and interrogate it. And yes, technology is a great enabler that both feeds and inspires creativity. But we as leaders must be the ones driving creativity and innovation in our teams. We need our people to feel confident that they have our trust and support to be their most creative and effective selves. You know, Steve Jobs once said that innovation is what distinguishes a leader from a follower. My call out for all of us is let's commit to a culture of purpose, creativity, and kindness to enable and inspire the next generation of creative leaders and propel our business forward. Thank you.